Hello and welcome to episode 92 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm May.
Welcome back all. Chris, you thought it would be a great idea for us to do another challenge. Actually, this one was much less painful. This time, postmarketOS. So for those who don't know, postmarketOS is a Linux distro based on Alpine that is aimed at phones and mobile devices primarily, but there are images for x86 devices. And the kind of purpose for the distro or project is to breathe life into old phones and devices and keep them going for as long as possible. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. And increasingly to try and mainline devices instead of relying on blobby bits, which we'll probably get into later because it's difficult.
Right, specifically to extend their lifespan.
Exactly.
So what devices did we all go for? Because you can run this on quite a lot of them.
So I ran this on a Lenovo Duet 3 Chromebook. So it's not the latest one, but it's the one before. So that's a Snapdragon 7C, 8 gigs of RAM, 120 gigs of eMMC. So a fairly competent budget Chromebook, all told. And this is one of the detachable 2-in-1 Chromebooks. So it's a touchscreen with a magnetically attached keyboard.
I flashed to a Moto G 3rd gen, which is unbelievably 10 years old now. Came out in 2015. It feels like a blink of an eye. And also the trashed Chromebook, which only runs from an SD card with 2 gigs of RAM.
That's an R11, isn't it? Like mine.
No, it's not. It's a Asus C200, but it's about the same CPU, a N2930, I think. So very, very weak specs.
Right, because that's what I used it on primarily, my R11 Chromebook that has 4 gigs of RAM and eMMC storage. But it also resurrected my, what I thought was dead, Pinebook Pro. I genuinely thought it was dead, and then I flashed it to SD card, put it in, and boom, it came to life. Amazing.
I tell you, it doesn't even turn on the power light if it doesn't have firmware.
I have tried with so many different images and I tried everything and I just gave up, stuck it in the drawer. But when I went rummaging for something to flash this on, I thought, well, I'll give it a go just in case. And it bloody worked. It was amazing.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Jay, because I think that thing just belongs in the drawer.
I'm inclined to agree. I also dug out my Lynx 7 tablet, which is an Atom x86 tablet with 1 gigabyte of RAM. And had a reasonably good time with that, I must say.
I actually pulled out a bunch of different devices for this. I had my Pinebook Pro, I had my Asus Transformer Book T300G, PinePhone Pro, because why not? It's a mobile distro. It should run on a mobile phone, right? And I was really impressed with it on, well, almost everywhere.
Oh, I forgot I put it on my PinePhone, not the Pro as well.
So it really is reviving old devices. I have to say, it is one of those distros that you're like, what have I got in the drawer? Oh, wow. Actually, I can get this going again thinking.
Oh, wow, it runs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I found that Phosh was the best desktop, or whatever you want to call it, interface, because I feel like Phosh was designed for shit hardware, and therefore it tends to run quite well on shit old hardware, funnily enough.
Yeah, I'd agree. I flashed GNOME foolishly on the Moto G, and it was like wheezing from minute one, and it was not the right ratio and resolution, so I was literally Ken Jeong, like looking at the screen. I was like, oh, sod this. I flashed Phosh, and I agree, it's like really, really trim GNOME at the right zoom level for these phone type devices.
I, of course, still have, a raw spot from that should be Lomiri, but, old wounds, whatever.
I went with just full GNOME latest version and had a pretty positive experience. Fairly responsive. All of the multi-finger gestures and stuff worked really well. Can't complain. I was fairly happy with the choice, to be honest. The only bug I did have was at the login screen, a super aggressive display timeout by default. Like, I couldn't actually swipe up and enter my password with the on-screen keyboard before the display turned back off, which was incredibly annoying. And it was only a 6-character password, so it was just impossible to get in without reattaching a keyboard.
Did you just leave it at 147, 147 then?
No, I did change it, but the password I have on this is just not something I care about.
741, 741.
Did you find the Tweaks app in Phosh, Joe?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so you could turn animations off.
Yeah.
And it was like a mix between GNOME Tweaks and the developer options menu of Android, right?
Yeah, but much more limited.
Yeah. But that helped a little bit. I turned the animations off, but then I don't like that because the progress wheels are just static. So you can't tell when something, like when you pull down to refresh, it's just a static arrow. So you can't tell whether anything's happening. So I turned them off and turned them back on again.
So how did you all find using it then? Was it a pleasant experience?
Absolutely. I'm still kind of surprised by it. On the Transformer book, what I tried to do was DD the flash drive it was running off of onto the internal storage, but I just ended up corrupting something. So the next time it tried to boot the internal storage from the USB stick because the InterMFS just picks whichever it finds first, unfortunately, instead of like what it booted off of. So I had to plug in an Ubuntu USB stick in order to wipe the drive. And it was amazing just how incredibly slow it was to boot Ubuntu 24.04 over that USB 2.0 interface when I didn't even notice it under Postmarket.
Yeah, they've picked a really good base, I think. Alpine is a very, very good choice for building an operating system for devices like this on. I also had a really nice time once I was in the actual OS, but it's weird flashing it to a phone, at least the phone I chose, because I ended up with two bootloaders. So you have the official one, power and volume down, and then LK2ND or LK second, where you have to power on and then wait a bit and then press volume down. And then you get a secondary bootloader, which you can boot the postmarketOS kernel from. So once I worked that out and then flashed it to the internal storage and I was in. But I haven't used it for a while. And I was also really pleasantly surprised at how put together it was and how snappy it was.
And I quite like APK as a package manager as well. It's very intuitive.
It's very apt-like, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just kind of works, yeah. Well, I had a little bit of a harder time installing it because the image I had to use was a generic Chromebook image that is actively being developed for this series of devices, or specifically the board that's used in this series of devices. But to be honest, it wasn't too hard. Everything kind of got done in half an hour. So had to boot the Chromebook into developer mode, enable unsigned USB booting, which was just one sudo cross system command once I'd remembered how to put it into developer mode. Then did a pm bootstrap and a pm bootstrap install to the MMC device. And then just a couple of tweaks thereafter. Display scaling wasn't enabled by default, and on a 2000 by 1200 display at 11 inches, that was sorely missed. So I had to go and do that. A couple of sensors and things I had to enable for rotation and the magnetic closing of the keyboard lid. Couple of lib input overrides for the stylus. But other than that, it was actually fairly straightforward.
That's funny because on my Chromebook R11, I didn't have to do anything. I just got the generic x86 Chromebook image and everything just worked. Like the touchscreen worked, rotation worked. It disabled the keyboard when I folded it into the tablet mode. I didn't have to do anything.
This is probably a quirk of it being an ARM Chromebook, right? It's just a slightly more niche hardware platform. And again, like a lot of these things, stuff like the camera and webcam are just never going to work.
When I booted into the Moto G, I went to connect to Wi-Fi and put the password in and it didn't work. And I ended up opening a terminal and using NMCLI. I was like, oh yeah, we're still in Linux land here. Now, to be fair, I had flashed the Edge channel of Alpine, which is like the rolling release. I then went back and flashed 2412, which is the latest Alpine stable, and things did work after that. So that was sort of mea culpa on that. But it was quite funny. The first thing I couldn't do was connect to Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I just went with the stable from the outset because that was what was recommended on the guide I was following. Seemed fine.
One thing I really liked is that SSH over USB is immediately available. So if you flashed like the phone, especially, because with the Chromebook I flashed to SD card and then put it in and booted, but with the phone, I was still connected to the USB cable, and once it was up, I could immediately SSH in via USB and then start managing stuff. And I would love, like, obviously there's ADB, and Termax has an SSH server, but you have to manually enable it all the time because of Android permissions and everything. So to have that straight away reminded me of this being Linux and it being really nice to just get in and start using the package manager from the keyboard of my laptop as like a kind of preceded configuration before I picked it up with my hands and started using it.
I was also really surprised that all the libva stuff for hardware accelerated video rendering was also installed. So on the generic machines that I had, and I guess the Pinebook Pro as well, I could play 1080p 60 frames per second YouTube without a big problem. Although the Pinebook Pro did struggle with the interface while that was playing.
Gary, you mentioned that you're on a generic device, and that's what's happening. So with the Moto G, there's actually two different options for flashing. You can flash a device-specific image or the target image, which is for the MSN 9.3, whatever it is that's inside the Qualcomm chipset. And the real focus on the moment is trying to group devices together as a target to try and have to do less work. Now, the problem is some bits are still proprietary. So that's what's really challenging to get working. And I found that the device-specific image ran a bit more effectively. But with ARM, I mean, especially new ARM like yours, I've got a decade's worth of hacking about that's gone into mine. With yours, it's really tricky, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I said generic image. It is one of those group of like Lenovo Chromebooks with the similar SoC and similar board that are grouped together. It's called a worm dingler image I had to download. So the image is for basically any revision of that like SoC on the particular board that sits behind a display panel. And yeah, there are certain things that work better on this than do on the Duet 5 versus whatever other Duet versions share a similar motherboard.
And then the laptop jumped out of the stack of laptops. It was the worm dingler.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. Go to linuxafterdark.net/support for details of how you can support us too. Patreon supporters have the option to listen to episodes without ads like this. And it's not just this show. There's Late Night Linux for news, discoveries, audience input, and misanthropy, 2.5 admins about system administration, Linux Matters for upbeat, family-friendly adventures, Linux Dev Time about developing with and for Linux, Hybrid Cloud Show for everything private and public cloud, and Ask the Hosts for off-topic questions from you. You can even get some episodes a bit early. We've got a lot going on, and it's only possible because of the people who support us. So if you like what we do and can afford it, it would be great if you could support us too at linuxafterdark.net/support. Can we talk about installation? And I think before we do that, we need to talk about the website and documentation. Now, I don't want to, I think the kids say throw shade on the project, but you can tell that it is just a group of volunteers having fun developing devices and hacking and stuff like that. It hasn't got that kind of corporate sheen that suggests there's a company behind this or anything. The website is quite confusing. The installation instructions are not very user-friendly. They assume a lot of knowledge. And this is my very long way of saying I was too thick to get the proper installer working and had to just DD pre-built images.
I think the installer might be broken.
I could not get it to work. I tried for too long and it just, I don't know, I thought it might be like a dependency problem or whatever. And I thought, right, I'll try it on actual postmarketOS. So I flashed an image first and then tried to build an image for another device using the installer and it just didn't work. So I don't know what you're talking about, Chris, with your, it just spits an image out easily talk.
Well, I had the same experience as Chris. I booted it from the live USB. I found online that I needed to do this PM Bootstrap init and this PM Bootstrap install. I did the init. It spat out an image that worked. I did an install and it just wrote it to the disk and I rebooted and logged in. Yeah, I had to do the few tweaks afterwards, which were on the postmarketOS wiki. But I actually felt like it was pretty well documented and really easy to install. I was expecting it to be a real pain in the ass, like have to set up ADB and fastboot and stuff like Lineage of old.
I think what might be going on here is different devices and different instructions written by different people, people who are responsible for different devices.
I agree. I think the website is like a giant wiki, and it's a tombola as to who has written the instructions and how recently they've been updated. So I think that's fair. But I'm with Gary. Like, I had a great time with PM Bootstrap. I just cloned the Git repo, made a symlink in my path to the Python script, and then ran it multiple times. But that's what I did last time I played with this, which is about 5 years ago now, I think.
So, May, did you just end up DDing stuff like me, downloading the images, extracting them, and just DDing?
Yeah, some of the targets that I used mentioned an installer image, but that definitely doesn't exist right now. I tried to build one from PM Bootstrap and the package wasn't even found. What that was is you would install the installer image to your SD card or whatever, put that in your PinePhone or your Pinebook Pro, and boot from that, and then it would offer you the options to set everything up and potentially flash the results to the internal storage.
Right. I'm very glad that you, of all people, struggled like I did. I thought it was me being thick, but it's not. Because if anyone was going to do this, you were going to do this.
I didn't even try PM Bootstrap until after I had already DD'd a bunch of stuff, because I'm used to just putting the image on the internal storage, even if it's like a PC, and running it that way. I do an awful load of testing trying to make embedded x86 devices, so this is normal. This is fine.
I didn't even know there were images until Joe said, I have to be honest. I looked up Moto G 2015 postmarketOS, which took me straight to the wiki page, and I was writing, which is what I did last time, writing the PM Bootstrap. After Joe mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, there's this whole other portal, which is not the wiki interface, which is larger font, much more kind of lineage-esque, and you pick from your list of devices, and there's like an HTTP mirror of the images to download, which I only found after Joe pointed to them. So strange. It does feel a bit sprawly as a project, which is its nature. I think it's not a criticism. It is just the nature of the project.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of volunteers hacking on devices at the end of the day.
I certainly feel like I was really, really impressed and actually quite annoyed that the two deal breakers, certainly for the Moto G3, were A, it doesn't charge when in the operating system. So that's really frustrating. You have to charge it up. And then when you boot into the operating system, you're like, right, set the egg timer. I have to use it, and then boot it into a recovery. And I had to flash TWRP recovery because it gives you a battery progress bar to then use it again. And also the brightness only operates at 100%. So those two combined mean you get like 45 minutes of screen time.
Poor thing.
Meanwhile, I was basking in the 10.5 hours of battery life that it gave me on the Chromebook.
Wow.
Yeah, the generic image for x86 was really good as well. I also tried it on my Surface Go, which is notorious for, 1, being a pain in the ass to get anything to boot on, and 2, being really, really slow. And for both of those, it worked really well.
Well, I booted the generic x86 version live on my Entroware Apollo, which is an 8th gen i7, just to see what it's like on reasonably good hardware. And it was just so fast on that. Because, I've been trying it on just all my shitty old hardware, but I thought, what's it like on somewhat modern hardware? And amazing is the answer to that.
And then, this episode is full of surprises, Flatpak is installed. So I installed Krita on both the T300 and the Surface Go, and the pen support worked perfectly as well. I was really impressed.
Yeah, I had much the same experience running a few Flatpaks on the Chromebook. Yeah, pen support worked. Everything was just almost as if it was meant to be the default operating system on the machine.
You see, the Flatpak experience paled slightly for me on the Moto G3, which I think was a hardware issue. I installed Telegram, and I could get to the login screen, but no on-screen keyboard appeared. I tried the Flatpak and I tried the Alpine APK install. I did work out that there is a thin bar along the bottom in Phosh. If you press and hold it, it forces the keyboard to appear, but then it overlays the Telegram interface, so you can't see what you're typing.
Yeah, I found the on-screen keyboard would get in the way sometimes, and it could do with a key to just say, fuck off, I don't want you anymore.
If you look, there's a very thin bar right under the keyboard. You can barely see it, like a line. I think you might have to enable an option in tweaks or settings, but then you can press and hold that line and at will make the keyboard appear and disappear.
That would have just been so good to know.
Yeah.
Right.
I only discovered that a little bit into the experience, though, because I was getting really, really annoyed. But yeah, KeyPass, I installed it from the Flatpak and the APK, and they both just loaded 25% of the window and didn't scale. So yeah, it wasn't as good for me on the Moto G.
It's kind of neat to go back and look at this stuff because this is stuff that was just brewing when I was finishing my tenure at UbiPorts. And the whole, this is where the keyboard rectangle is, so don't draw here problem, sounds like it hasn't been solved, as well as the, hey, I want the keyboard to appear right now problem.
Well, when I used more native apps like Firefox, or I installed Isle Riot Solitaire, if it uses the GNOME libinput devices and all of the libraries are close to that, then things seem to scale, appear, and disappear. But once you go a bit off piste, like KeyPass, I think it uses Qt for KeyPass XC and stuff like that, and you start to, it starts to get really, really difficult after that.
Yeah, I can't say I really noticed this in GNOME, but I was probably predominantly using GTK apps. Although, to be fair, there probably were a couple of Qt apps that I installed and I didn't notice the problem. But I then again was attaching and unattaching the keyboard fairly frequently.
I think the XFCE experience on the Chromebook was very, very good. And also, I'm going to go back to it after this because I mentioned a little while ago I was playing with the latest release of XFCE with Wayland. That's now in the Alpine Edge channel. And you can just change the repository files and then do an APK update and reboot. And it will give me XFCE 420 and I could get LabWC running and things. So the desktop experience, honestly, on really weak stuff, if it was for me especially, and I was used to it, it would be rocketing up the charts as an option to install on x86 stuff.
Right. So this is my question for you. Is this actually useful beyond a bit of fun? Like, are we going to stick with it on any of these devices? Are we going to actually use this day to day?
I am incredibly tempted to keep it around on my Chromebook, and I did actually do something incredibly useful with it just this week. I installed Waydroid on it, and I ran the Android application that controls my mixing console. So I have a Behringer XR12 mixing console that I use for various little bits and pieces. It has a Linux native app for Raspberry Pi, which I thought, that's great, I can get this running because it's just ARM. But for whatever reason, couldn't get it to install. It is just a binary that you download, chmod plus X and run. But for whatever reason, anytime I tried to do that, it just said that the file wasn't found, which was really, really bizarre.
Missing linker.
It could be something like that. To be honest, I didn't troubleshoot it much because this was like the afternoon before I was going to mix a live gig in a pub. So I installed Waydroid with the Android version of the Xair app. And functionality-wise, it was absolutely flawless, really stable. I could have mixed the entire gig on it, but running the Waydroid VM with this application on top just meant that it was really laggy. Like, I just sent a photo of it in our Telegram chat, and like dragging those sliders, there was a noticeable delay between me moving my finger and the slider going up and down, which was a bit disappointing, so I had to do the whole thing on my iPad. But that would have been a really, really useful thing for it. And otherwise, I think just having proper Linux on there that isn't the Debian container that comes with Chrome OS just makes it a much, much more usable device. I know I'm dreaming, but if the webcam ever worked, then it would just be my go-to on there. But unfortunately, I do sometimes pull it out to use for video calls and stuff for some volunteering I do because I've got to be logged into a separate G Suite account and things, and it just isn't going to work on this, unfortunately.
I think I'm going to leave it on my low-end x86 devices. It runs really well. It does everything that I want it to do. I think I'm going to leave it.
I would leave it definitely on the broken Chromebook. It's the snappiest XFCE experience I've had on it by far.
Well, I'm going to leave it on my tablet, my Link 7 tablet, because it is the first time I've ever experienced a distro that works with rotation. So it doesn't actually detect the rotation, but I can just toggle it into landscape mode. And then the touchscreen is not perpendicular to what I'm actually looking at, if you know what I mean. Because all the other times I've tried Linux on this thing, you turn it sideways and the touchscreen just doesn't understand that you've turned it sideways. I don't know if that's just Linux and the rest of the stack or whether it's something specific to Postmarket or Alpine. I might have to do some experimentation there, but it is the best experience I've ever had. That said, if you try and do anything taxing, it runs out of the gigabyte of memory and just shits itself and you have to hard reboot it. So I'm not sure how useful it'll be, but it'll definitely stick around for a bit.
If I could charge the Moto G3 while the screen was off, it would be a small Linux jump host with a battery backup. But that's the real killer for that one, because you can use it with the screen off, but you can't charge it. And that's a real downer. And that's because of proprietary charging firmware and things like that. Like, it's not the fault of postmarketOS. They can't get to the charging circuitry from the operating system, basically.
I might leave it on the R11 Chromebook, maybe, because I have tried GNOME on there before and it works really well with the rotation and everything, but it doesn't feel snappy at all. So I might put Phosh on there and leave it on there and just use it as an x86 tablet, maybe, but we'll have to see.
My summary would be 5 years ago, it was definitely something I played with for a week or two and put back in a drawer. Now it's something I would leave on the device and use on x86 older hardware and keep checking in on, because I do definitely feel like progress has been made since the last time I looked at this.
Yeah, I also went into this expecting very little and came out of it realizing that when this device does come to end of life for Chrome OS, I can still have a perfectly usable touchscreen Linux machine at the end of it.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
And I've been May.
See you later.